Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're broadcasting from the Thomas K. McKeon Center for Creativity, and I'm your host, Corey D. Taylor. My guest today is none other than Dr. Gina. If you love Dr. Phil, well, you're going to love Dr. Gina. She's here today to share with us a whole bunch of things about life. If you want to know what it takes to have success in life, then you come to the right place, so stay tuned because this is Up Close with Corey Taylor. Hello and welcome back, and we are here with my special guest today, Dr. Gina. Hey, lady, how are you?
Hello, Corey Taylor. How are you doing?
Look, I like the way you say, hello, Corey Taylor. So, I'm so glad you're here on the show.
I'm really, really honored to be with you here today.
Well, good, because I'm glad you're honored because I feel honored because, first of all, I don't really know how to say your last name that well. You go by Dr. Gina, but you're Italian, so
Yes.
say your last name.
How about the whole thing? It has a
Yeah,
nice
okay, go
ring.
ahead.
Gina Pazzaglia.
Oh my gosh, that's cool. That's
It
pretty
is
cool.
cool. I like it.
Gina Pazzaglia. Use the Pazzaglia.
Yeah, I was the only one that ended up with an Italian name. All my siblings were like Cindy Lou, Peggy Joe, Gary Lynn, Randy Lee. They hated I got the Italian name.
Oh my gosh, but their last name is the same.
Same last name.
But did people find it hard to say your name? Because I find it
Yes.
hard. I don't. That's why I let you say it because I didn't want to butcher it. Because I would have been like Passanagili or something like that.
Pizza was the famous one in high school.
They called you
Either
Pizza.
Red or Pizza. Those were my two nicknames.
Well, I'm so glad you're here today because we got a lot to cover. Because for our viewers' sake, you are just loaded with a wealth of information. In my time of getting to know you and everything, you have done a lot. Well, first of all, look at all these books.
I have done a lot.
Like all of these books. This is bananas, and I'm like, how do you have a life? Because you got all of these books, but you do have a full life. But yet still you managed to write, to date, how many books has it been?
3 workbooks. I'm on my 5th children's book, and no, a trilogy, and then 10 workbooks, and then 5 children's books.
My goodness. And here's the thing that our viewers would probably be shocked. You've done how many books in 1 year?
Gosh, I don't know. I think I did all of these within the last 2 years. A couple of them were pre-existing, just in a different format, but I was able to actually publish them.
Man, and that's why I'm excited. But besides being an author,
Yes.
I know you don't want to do this, but I need people to know your credentials because you're like the Oklahoma Dr. Phil, okay? So I need you to tell us what are all of those credentials that you have.
Oh,
you don't
where
have to
do
tell
I
us all. Just
start?
tell us a couple of the
I'll
main
tell
ones.
you where I became aware of needing to go ahead and get my PhD was when I went to ORU to get my bachelor's of social work and then to OU to get my master's in social work. And I was licensed as a clinical social worker. And everybody always asks me, so which DHS office do you work in? And I'm like, man, I'm never going to be able to be an author with the idea that I'm a DHS worker. Not that there's anything wrong with DHS workers. That just wasn't my inspiration.
Because people didn't know the scope of what you could really be with a clinical master social worker. Yes.
So I decided at that point to pursue my PhD. At that point, I was running a not-for-profit agency and was the founder and director and jumped into my PhD. Had a couple of people just kind of prodding me on. I'm like, well, this seems to be the route I need to go.
Wow. And so what I need people to know is, like so many times when people hear about someone being a doctor or being, a clinical social worker or a clinical psychologist, they don't always think those people that are legitimate or they have thriving business. You have a thriving business where you literally see clients. Or do you call them patients? What do you call them?
I call them patients. That's
Yes.
always been my frame of reference. I started out with a medical model. And so my younger children's father was a doctor, and we had my first practice was alongside of a hospital. So my tendency was always to call them patients, even though they became consumers with some mental health groups and clients. That's just always been my standard.
and you have a pretty thriving business. Now I'm gonna get to the meat and the potatoes here but I still want to talk about a couple of these things. So you have this trilogy
Yes.
of books, and tell us a little bit about this.
It actually was born from a women's abuse recovery group that I do, and every year, right before January, I have the group talk about what their annual goals are going to be. And so I jump started with, I'm going to do a trilogy.
Wow.
And so, boom, it started the trilogy. I had written a few books, but not had them published, and I knew domestic violence, excuse me, was such a problem in Oklahoma and across the country, in the world, kind of the unspoken elephant that no one really wants to talk about. So I formulated a plan of action to begin to write a novel series that would make it more palatable, you know, a little bit of sex, a little bit of mystery, engage the people in the characteristics. But my dissertation was on adult children of domestic violence, being that my mother was severely mentally ill and I was exposed to domestic violence. I'm sorry. I was exposed to domestic violence. I wasn't the direct recipient of it because I was the baby, but she was sort of masochistic, sadistic, and would have the kids beat each other and beat her, and I saw it. And as I got in the clinical field, I started noticing patterns that I even noticed in myself. So, you know, you never want a wounded healer, so I went and got my own therapy and worked on my own childhood issues. I had object relations was part of my curriculum in school, which is about how we define ourselves and how our childhood rearing impacts our view of self and our ego structure. So I knew that the impact of that was great. So I ran a male batterers group for 3 years that was certified by the state.
Wait. A male batterers group, like they are battered or they are the battered?
I did.
Battering.
The interesting component was I was running a Peace for Kids camp for children. I was also running a women's victims group and a male batterers group. And so I got to see all sides to the coin and realize they all were children of domestic violence.
Oh, wow.
These just grew up, but the patterns were very similar. So my theory base was adult children of domestic violence have lack of emotional awareness and attachment relationship issues. So that's what my dissertation was on.
Now, I'm going to sum that up because I heard someone say this to me a long time. Hurting people hurt other people.
Exactly.
And that's what that is going to. And, you know, I know you can, that's the reason why I want you to share, you know, what are those different certifications. So you got your PhD, your master clinical social worker.
Licensed
Yeah, I got to get it
worker.
all together. But then you got some other ones.
Yes, I'm a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. I'm a certified hypnotherapist. I really enjoy hypnotherapy because it helps kind of break through these subconscious patterns, which are so ingrained in us from in utero on up, especially during childhood, and a lot of things we don't remember. So I find that layered hypnotherapy is very, very effective for people. So I became a certified hypnotherapist. I'm certified in Reiki and the basics. Certified as a domestic violence counselor.
So let me ask you this question because I know people are going to be like, hypnotherapist. Is hypnosis what we think it is based on TV's sensationalism?
What was that latest movie that was like crazy? I'm like, oh my God.
Catch Me If Now You See Me.
Yes, I was like, no one's going to ever want to do hypnotherapy with me.
Right, because that's what it's like. And you are getting sleep, and then they're like, ugh, you know. So take us through that because that is a tabooish type thing. Everybody's always like, you know, I don't want to be hypnotized because then I may not ever have control of myself and and then Get Out is probably what you're referring to.
I'm thinking.
Where she was like, you know, you're in the sunken place and then he was like, oh, and he could never get out and he would be crying and stuff. So take us through hypnotherapy because there are a lot of people that are scared because of watching Get Out with the woman hypnotizing the young man.
Well, I can tell a funny story of my origins with hypnotherapy that made me a little reserved.
Okay.
So early in my practice, I'd worked a lot of inpatient facility stuff. And so one of my professors at ORU actually was really good at neurolinguistics and hypnotherapy strategies. And I learned some of that from him. So move forward, I was in an outpatient setting with my younger kid's father, and we had a family mental health care. It was with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, so it was a Christian. So I have this abuse recovery group. So I have this woman that comes in, and I do some hypnotherapy with her. Well, I was used to being an inpatient where I could see them every single day. Well, outpatient, you typically do maybe once, twice a week, you know, if at best. So anyway, I do a hypnotherapy kind of regression with her, and the next week, she's in her 50s, the next week she literally comes in with her thumb in her mouth and her teddy bear. Her daughter brings her in.
Oh my, wait, she's still hypnotized?
She never came out of the regression. And so I was like, oh my God, what did I do to this woman?
She had been like that for how long?
A week. And so I was like, oh, I have to reevaluate this. So I prodded into it very gingerly after that.
Wait, stop. She was hypnotized for a whole week in regression as a little kid?
As a little kid. And so I really kind of reevaluated my approach, realizing you can't do it that degree with someone with that much trauma too early in the process. But in general, hypnosis is a state that's like an alpha state. It's the same state you're in where you're driving down the road and you're like, my God, how did I get here? I don't even remember getting here. Or you're on the computer and like 3 hours have gone by and you're like, oh my God, where did 3 hours go? So it is, your brain is in a softer pattern where it receives up to 250% more information than when it is just in a beta state, which is the normal activity state. So with the hypnotherapies, I like to do the layering where I have the brainwave patterns, I have music, I have the induction, the deepener, the journey, the scripting, and it just works. It's amazing. It's phenomenal.
Well, see, that sounds interesting because I know a lot of people have that whole taboo thing like, you can't hypnotize me, I'm never going to be hypnotized, and all of that old crazy stuff. But it is a real thing.
Oh yeah, Medicare actually covers it. So I have.
Are you serious?
I'm serious because it does so amazing for anxiety and for pain management. It's extremely like. I can have someone come in and they're in total pain, and when they leave, they're like, the pain is gone. And usually the pain leaves for about 24 hours. So I've made mine in downloadable products. And that also takes kind of the feeling like someone's controlling you out of it because you have control over your audio and when you use it and when you don't. And of course, it's got the disclaimer not to use it while you're driving or using any heavy machinery.
Wait, you don't want nobody to get hurt, right?
Right, I don't want anybody to get hurt.
So I was wanting to bring you here today because I wanted everyone to see. You got books on PTSD, you got rewriting your script, healing the hurt. What is this one? Healing
the bruises. That's one that I used in both the women's abuse recovery, the male batterers recovery, as well as with the Peace for Kids program. I have a teen version of it. It's a 12-step version of addressing physical, emotional, and sexual abuse issues from your past.
And I have to stop you because you mentioned that about your book, and when you were talking about this book, Celestine Allegories, you got the trilogy, but you said there was some sex stuff in there, and I don't want to stay on this long, but I want to say this is because typically when people write novel-esque books, it comes across as more fantasy more than anything. But what I hear you're saying, you did something different. You were taking like real life examples of clinical psychological things that happen to people and putting them in a book to use these as ways to help people versus I just want you to read a steamy love novel.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so what made you think that would actually be well or work? I mean, what made you go there?
Well, my brother is a retired lieutenant colonel or something in the Navy, and he was an epidemiologist, and he helped me miserably through my dissertation. I cried many, many times. He cussed me out many, many times. But the one thing he asked at the end of it, now with this dissertation, who is the audience you want to reach? And as I pondered that, I reflected and I said, I want the general population to know this information. How do you get taboo or unspeakable things that everybody know exist but
Right.
don't want to talk about it. How do you
Correct.
get that? So a novel format, I had already, like I said, played around with some novel writing before, and I was on a trip. I like writing. When I go on trips, I get really inspired, and then I get to write it off as a writing trip. So
Business.
it's kind of a business
Okay.
trip. So it inspired me to write these characters, and the characters you a little different from a typical book. You actually get inside their head, and you hear the conflicted information and the misbeliefs that they have, and the insecurities and the attachment withdrawal dynamics, and how narcissism comes from shame of domestic violence. And so you get to see a lot of aspects, but it's also entertaining. There's also a Seminole princess that is kind of a quantum fantasy aspect of it. And the reason I decided to do that is because in my practice, I worked with the Kickapoos for a while, for about a year and a half, and there was a lot of violence and a lot of murder in that tribe.
Wow.
And then I've had numerous tribe members of different tribes that have had murders as a result of domestic violence or near-death experiences. So I decided to honor the Indian element of it.
Okay.
And the Seminoles were interesting because they were a tribe that actually the slaves blended with the Seminole tribe to fight the French.
Okay.
And there was a lot of them taken as slaves. And so the Seminole princess in this book is a relative to the protagonist, and she has unresolved issues of trauma.
Wow.
And so she revisits her relatives trying to resolve her own conflict. So there's a little mystical element too, but that's kind of the intergenerational impact that I
Right.
have.
Okay, wow. So that's a lot, man. But then I got you got more books over here, Positive Parenting. Then over here you got Overcoming Depression, and then you have Directing Your Life Script. So you have Rewriting Your Life Script, but then you have Directing Your Life Script. So talk to me about what does it mean to either rewrite your life script as well as direct it?
At first, the first one is directing your life script, where you just become aware of how I script my life. Then the rewriting it is going back through and looking at and reflecting at childhood unmet needs, because childhood unmet needs are where you develop misbeliefs. And those misbeliefs are where you kind of collide with the world around you, and nothing seems to go like you want it to, but you keep doing the same thing over and over. Logic does not fix that. If you've ever noticed when you're like, I'm going to change this, and then 3 weeks later you're doing the same thing. Why? What they say, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again. Yeah, we all have our little, I always say we live in the twilight zone.
Right.
So about 93, some people say 85%, all the way to 96% of our actions and reactions in the world around us is subconscious. And that's where your internal dialogue and internal script is. And so you have to learn kind of where does that come from. Also in the books, I have an unborn fetus that you kind of get to know that is already experiencing the influences. That impacts the idea that we're being imprinted all the way into utero about how our design, our origination of what maybe our creator, or if people don't believe in that, whatever our design is into this earth begins to be collided with circumstances, situations, chemicals. All of these things influence why we're not being the people we want to be.
Right. Now, here's the thing that I thought that was very interesting out of all of this is that you've written all of these books, and you also go out and do workshops and do speaking. That's why a lot of these are workbooks. When you're out, what is the most important thing that people always literally pull on you for information for when you're out doing your presentations?
When I'm out speaking, it depends on if I'm speaking to a clinical crowd, they're kind of they're there for the CEUs, or if I'm speaking
CEUs, continuing education.
Continuing
okay,
education.
I just want to make sure people
thank you.
knew
Yes,
what that was.
and then other crowds that are just the private sector, they're more engaged on how to make their life better just today. And that's really why I do workbooks. I've always had a lot of work processing stuff, because I think what happens is people read information, they read self-help books. It implants in their head, which is your your cognition is your least powerful part of your brain. So the experiential aspect of doing something, of changing a behavior, of watching yourself transform, that gets in there. And, you know, according to epigenetic scientists, they now know even your DNA, your genetic DNA, can be altered by perceptions and thoughts. So
Wow. And you know, I want to go back to this whole subconscious thing because Malcolm Gladwell, one of the favorite authors I like to read his book, but there was a book he wrote called Blink. And what Blink did for me was, you know, when we hear about subconscious, most people be like thinking like this whole Twilight Zone-esque type situation. But what Malcolm Gladwell did in the book Blink, and I hear you saying that, he had the ability to bring the subconscious to a level of that took it from out of this whole taboo range and said, like, look at your brain as a supercomputer. And your subconscious are like these archived records that are not accessed unless you know, you pull on them to access them. He was like, so you talk about consciousness being who you are today, knowing, being aware of everything. He said, but what's going on really, there's a lot more information being stored in your subconscious. And so he talks about this in Blink, how to access the subconscious and start living and using that information to complete or to make your life more fulfilling.
Exactly. Let me mention this real quick. This one's funny because it has to do with that. So this book, I was out in my garden. I have a healing garden, and I just kind of go out there and meditate, and it's accessible to my patients. So I was out there, and I was doing some of my meditational stuff, and I heard real clearly inside of me, go publish your parenting workbook.
Okay.
And I'm like, I don't have a parenting workbook.
Right.
Go on with meditating. Then 10 minutes later, go publish your parenting workbook. So I hear this 3 times. I'm like, well, dang, maybe I do. So I go in my archived records, an old D drive, and there it is. I had forgotten that when I had the agency and I had been working under a grant, I had worked with another lady and had that great 80-page parenting workbook just sitting there in the archives. That is a perfect example of how I had forgotten completely, but there it was, and I revised it a little bit with some of the social media dilemmas that kids have now and a few newer things, but basically it was a great workbook. I'm like, oh my God, I forgot. I had this workbook.
You had a workbook already done.
I had it already
and you just needed to put it out there.
I just needed to put it out there.
Here's the thing that I think that's interesting, like chapter 3, it said parenting styles, how to identify yours. Are you authoritative, authoritarian, permissive, indirect, single parenting? That's pretty broad when it comes to parenting style. And the thing is, I have 4 children of my own. And the one thing that people always have asked my wife and I, how did you all have kids that were successful? Well, I'm in no way, shape, or form going to be able to explain like you explained it. But what I told them was, I say, I have a parenting style that's different from my wife's parenting style. And what we have learned how to do is to co-parent, even though we're one unit. We're not separate parents. We're not divorced. We're together. But we've learned how to co-parent and learned how to identify what's her strengths, what's her weaknesses, what's my strengths, and what's my weaknesses. And then when we look at our children right now, it's like, they not only have the best of both of our worlds, but they have evolved into their own beings that have taken attributes from both of us. And they are some of the most hilarious young people in the world, but they are also lovable. And it's like they take the best of everything. So when you offer something like positive parenting, I think that putting the pieces together, I think that's so amazing. So I want to ask you this question real quick. I want to talk about relationships because you do a lot of work with relationships.
Yes, I do.
So we hear about so much stuff on the news. You talked about social media. And I was just talking to someone earlier. They were like, you know, it seems like people put all of their business out on social media, and it's bad, and it helps it shipwrecks relationships.
Yes, absolutely.
So talk to us a little bit about what are you seeing nowadays in terms of relationships since the influx of social media, and how can we somewhat help that? And that's a lot, but I want to tell me what you see, and then what have you offered to remedy?
It's fairly funny when couples come in and they both have their text and they show me their conflicts on their text.
Wow.
So communication has really altered. What I find difficult is that men in general have had a difficult time putting kind of their word emotion together. And so it is actually easier for them to text. They do a better job expressing themselves. On the other hand, they're losing some of their ability
Right.
to have that direct communication, face-to-face,
right.
eye contact, and communicate in an effective way. So it's kind of a catch-22, I think. In some ways, it takes the toxicity and the high conflict out of fights, you know, because they're texting, one's upstairs, one's downstairs, and they're texting their conflict. And that I would say is now the status quo when I see couples.
So real quick, what is one thing that you offer them that can help them when they are in this type of a conflict?
Well, I do the loving, lasting relationship. One of the areas is I go over the 10 intimacy domains and learning how to communicate about where they are in the domains, because most affairs are born out of areas of those domains begin to be met by someone else. And so most people don't intentionally go out and just be like randomly have sex with someone. It's a progress of this relationship diluting and this one increasing. So learning how to communicate about what's missing, learning how to identify and address the chief conflict issues, communicate with other things besides just words, that there is body language, there's metaphorical references that say a lot more than just words.
Wow.
And so there's a lot of areas, teaching fun, teaching sexuality, teaching how to verbalize expectations. Oklahoma's terrible. I always say Oklahoma has Okie 101, which is like read three blank pages and figure out what I mean.
Now listen, that's so funny because this show, I want to go here because I could sit here and talk to you about this all day, and we're going to have you come back, and you're our resident person who we could talk about issues with. But this show, Up Close with Corey Taylor, is all about helping people to know what it would take for them to go on and be successful in life, no matter what the area is. In about 15 seconds, what do you think that takes?
To be successful is to get to know you, the authentic you, not be ashamed of your experiences, own them 100%, embrace the suffering, embrace the experiences, own it, learn from it, and be the complete you you're designed to be.
Dr. Gina, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much.
All right.
I appreciate it, Mr. Corey.
Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed our show today. I would like to thank my guest, Dr. Gina, for coming to join us. Think about this. Change is inevitable, but your attitude towards that change, it is always optional. Until next time, keep looking forward.